Welcome to the weekend. I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute. You're watching Devil's Advocate. So, two tired reporters. Isn't that fun? We're taping this the day after the election. There's still a couple things up in the air, but man, what a race. What a night in Colorado. And again, Colorado is different than the rest of the nation. From the Denver Post, our good friend Lynn Bartels, who is up all night drinking lots of coffee and working the computers, I bet.
Yeah, loving it.
Loving it. And Eli Stokols from Fox 31. You look well rested, my friend.
I think you're lying.
I think
Again.
Again. All right. Let's start at the top, work our way all the way down to the bottom. The governor's race, the weirdest governor's race, I think, in the nation. This was just bizarre. I was surprised that Hickenlooper won with a majority. At this point, it looks like he's got a little over 50%. I could have sworn, he'd get 45, maybe 47. He'd win a plurality, but not more. You kind of saw this one coming.
I did, and I told you, I think there was this, I went to a senior citizen center in Aurora, and the guy was talking, he was a Republican. I asked who he voted in the governor's race, and he said Hickenlooper. And I said, why? And he had voted for Republicans in other races. And I said, why Hickenlooper then? He goes, because he's the only one who's ever created a job. I think he knows how to create jobs. And Hickenlooper had impressive Republican support, too. I mean, you have to remember this. If Tancredo weren't in the race, if it were just Mays, for example, Tancredo was very effective at tearing down Hickenlooper with his daily attacks and all that. But, I mean, and Hickenlooper with the I'll always be positive never fought back. But you had a whole group of people that were lined up behind Hickenlooper to start with that were crossover folks.
Well, I mean, Hickenlooper, it was odd to see a liberal Denver mayor win statewide, that he was able to pull votes in from around the state. It's still, the majority surprised me. I never thought he'd get over 50%.
Yeah, we weren't sure what to expect yesterday, and we heard prognosticators saying that Tancredo late yesterday on election day had a chance still to pull the upset. Obviously, that was far from the case given the final numbers, but you know, John Hickenlooper, he's seen by a lot of Tancredo supporters, a lot of people outside the area as a liberal Denver mayor, but he didn't run like that. And maybe the situation on the other side of the ticket allowed him not to run really like a Democrat. He never really excited the Democratic base. We wondered about that and whether that base would still be there for him. Obviously, they were. But he never really had to go too far out there on the left flank. A lot of progressives were complaining that he was running just like the Republican light, that it was really a race between three Republicans to varying degrees, of moderate to extreme. So the margin, who knows what to account for that. I think it was interesting that Mays, as much as Tancredo tore into Dan Mays and knocked him down, that he still finished at 11%. Maybe people just voting for the Republican nominee.
I think there were a lot of people who were Republicans who were never going to vote for Hickenlooper, but were not going to vote for Tom. Tom has his enemies within the movement as well, and there are a lot of Republicans that won't do it. And so Dan Mays got over his big victory. He made it over 10%.
He saved the party from itself.
He saved the party. We are still a major party.
A little damage, probably, but
damage. Are you kidding? We never looked better. Let's go to what I think is the real upset here. I thought Buck by 2 to 4 points. It seemed like most of the polls seemed to agree that way. This was our year. Republicans were sweeping the nation. You remember the wave and all. It didn't happen. As we're recording this, Buck is not conceded, but it looks like it's over. I would have to give this to Bennett. Bennett just had a celebration. You say it looked like he just won the World Series.
Well, there are 250 Democrats out there in City Park, and they were euphoric because, again, this was not supposed to be their year, and this race was really maybe the most contentious, competitive one on the board, and maybe the highest stakes. So for them to pull this off, and then to be able to celebrate also having a governor, having held Ed Perlmutter's seat, all these people gathering out there, kind of like, oh my God, we won, we held our ground. There was so much relief and so much excitement and validation for those Democrats out there. And this race, you thought the national headwind blowing in the Republican direction might be strong enough to just get Buck across the finish line.
This was the most expensive Senate race in the nation. What, $33 million in outside money, plus who knows how much from the campaigns. I mean, we're talking, 20, 30 bucks per vote. Just give me the 20 bucks, I'll vote for you. That would be a whole lot better. Were you surprised by this?
I'll be honest. I picked, in the office pools or the polls that you do, I picked Buck. I thought it would be really close, but I just didn't see how. I think I was actually torn, too, because I know people in the school world, and there's a really way to anger people, and that's by being your superintendent. And they're like, I'm undervoting. I'm not going to vote for him. And there were Romanoff people that were like, I'm not going to vote for him. So I mean, I always think that the Norton people might have been mad, but the Republicans, I think, maybe kiss up a little, you know,
Right.
pull it together and do it for the duty, you know. Then Democrats are more like, yeah, I didn't win, so he can't win either. You know, it's interesting in all this is remember, and everybody said, oh, Bill Ritter picked a loser. But you look at it, and Bill Ritter picked a winner, and I'm not certain Romanoff could have pulled that off. I mean, Bennett had connections. He knew tons of people. He had people who thought he'd really worked hard.
Let me try a different tact. I think Romanoff is a better candidate as far as a guy who gets out there and shakes the hands and is on message better. The thing that worked for Bennett is what worked for Hickenlooper. He didn't say too many stupid things, and there was Buck. It seemed as though every time you turned around, there was a gaffe, not a bad gaffe, but a gaffe, and they started piling up. Is that what made the difference?
Gaffes and repudiations. Well, I said this, but I don't mean this now. I said that, but I don't mean it this time.
I was in favor of Amendment 62.
But now I'm not. But now I'm not going to talk on it anymore. We were talking that probably the unsung hero in all this is the tracker, who has
explain the tracker.
The people who go to various events on both sides and capture people saying things. You saw it happen with Hickenlooper and the backward Coloradans in the last couple of days. They catch you and then they run it over and over again.
And that was an interview. That wasn't even
that was a year ago.
That was a year back of the room. But the guy that they paid to follow Ken Buck around, starting in the primary, probably the best money the Democrats and the Bennett campaign spent in this race, and there was a lot of money spent here. And that's because
this is a guy that just follows around with either a video camera,
with a tiny little video camera on a small little single tripod thing, and just sits there and tapes it. Ken Buck knows he's there. Says hello to him. I mean, he's there. He's probably there more than the most ardent Ken Buck supporters. But in the end, that's what allowed Bennett, I think, throughout the last month or 2 months of this race, to be on offense and keep Buck on his heels.
Not an in-your-face kind of guy. Not asking questions. Just sitting there recording what's going on. And so when Ken Buck gets off the stage and says, "Would you tell these birthers to knock it off?" Which I would think most liberals would like, or the other gaffes.
Yeah, and some of these gaffes were self-inflicted and were not the tracker. What he said on Meet the Press in response to the question about whether he thinks homosexuality is a choice, I mean, that was just Ken Buck not being astute or shrewd enough to duck that question. Michael Bennett was very good at ducking questions. He didn't give us a lot to nail him on, to play over and over again and say, oh my God, he said this. Whereas Ken Buck gave Michael Bennett a lot of ammunition, and I think that was the difference. I think even in what was supposed to be a Republican year, there were enough things that would pile up where at the end of the race, the DSCC was running that I just can't vote for Ken Buck commercial again and again, and I think that may have been the difference.
Well, when it comes to saying crazy things, one being a guy who's made a living doing that, I also look at some of the other politicians. Tancredo says crazy things all the time, but he was taken as a serious candidate when Hickenlooper made his backward-thinking Coloradans comment. It was a year ago, and it didn't seem to engage the same way that the Buck comments did. Is that just a matter of money that they weren't able to air it as much?
Well, probably. I mean, Baby Buchanan told me over and over again, if we had money, this is ours. They didn't have the money to go after it to be effective. The other thing is, I honestly believe that if Jane Norton had won the primary, Bennett would have had a hard time because his whole appeal was to women. Look at all those ads about women, and incest and abortion and birth control and this and that. I mean, how are you going to out Jane Norton when it comes to, the estrogen factor?
Would Jane have won?
I think it would have been closer.
Yeah,
Am I wrong on that?
It would have been a tougher strategy for Michael Bennett, most definitely. And again, you talk about the influence of the Tea Party. There's a lot of excitement and energy on the conservative side through the primaries, but in a state like Kentucky, you put Rand Paul on the ballot, not a problem. But other places in the country, Colorado is pretty split right down the middle. It didn't work in Delaware, obviously. It was a former witch running in a blue state. It's not going to work.
She wasn't a former witch. She only dabbled in witchcraft, and who hasn't?
We were talking about her on SNL, though. I mean, that's all you need to know. Here, Ken Buck, every time you'd hear him in the national media, it was another Tea Party candidate, Ken Buck, and that label, I think, stuck to him. He was not nearly as wacky as some of these other Tea Party people. He was also, speaking of the national press,
he was lampooned on Saturday Night Live, and then again at Colbert.
Yeah.
And on the Colbert Report was just
hysterical.
Let me ask